Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme today we'll be discussing the government's announcement that they are about to release 1,700 prisoners this week, followed by a further 5,000 in the weeks to come. And we're asking, what impact will releasing so many prisoners have on our streets? And in today's programme I'm joined by Alistair Scott, the UK Director for Vision for Israel, together with Melanie Symonds from Hot Newspaper. So welcome to the programme. I'll start off with you, Melanie. It's great to see you, and it was especially nice to see you at Bicton College for the Southwest Bible Study Conference. So that was a delight. But share with us your thoughts on this new Labour government and the direction they're taking in, and how you've actually covered this in the previous edition of Hot Newspaper, or should I say the current edition? The current.
Thank you, Sam. Well, the next one's oh my goodness, 2 weeks away, so it's sort of in gestating at the moment. This one is still current, and it's we actually did go to town a bit on the government, the current cabinet ministers, and issued quite a few prayer alerts as well about them. We looked at the Labour manifesto and also what they're saying, what they're not saying, and already we're seeing things which aren't in the manifesto taking place.
No, absolutely. And Alistair, good to see you back on Politics Today, and just share with our viewers the very successful conference Vision for Israel had in Brighton last weekend, where the ministry celebrated its 30th anniversary, some achievement.
Yes, I'm wearing the badge, which if you can see on the screen, it actually says 30 years of Vision for Israel. It was a great conference, it really was. A lot of people joined us, and in the circumstances, not surprising, not only were we celebrating 30 years of ministry, but there was prophetic words about the future as well. And because of what we're seeing happening in Israel, its main focus was getting into prayer, praying for those hostages. I mean, the news of the hostages being shot just a day or so before that our conference was kind of had an effect on most people there. And we realized that we'd spoken about it before on the board, that this has to be a time not only of celebration for what God has used this Vision for Israel ministry to do, but also to pray for the current situation there and how can we be more and more effective. And the challenges are always there for everyone who's an attendee, not to just accept the false news that's going on most of the media, and actually take every opportunity not only to share the truth but also to challenge those who are proclaiming the lies, which is challenging because we tend to be the minority within a minority when we stand up for Israel in these days, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't open our mouths and be heard. Just make sure every opportunity you have to talk to people who are pro-Palestinian or whatever, that the truth comes out of your mouth, and it challenges people to think differently, perhaps.
No, absolutely.
It was a very good time.
So Gideon's army comes to mind there,
yeah.
That you don't need large numbers, you just need God on your side, and he can do the rest. Melanie, share with us your thoughts on the announcement this week by the new Labour government that they have released this week 1,700 prisoners, and they plan also to release a further 5,000 in the coming weeks to tackle what they consider an emergency crisis with overcrowding in our prisons. But many of those being released are also violent offenders. Share your thoughts on this announcement as the government tries to tackle our prison crisis.
Well, firstly, I did hear quite a good interview on GB News last night, which is also quite good on Israel as well. It gives the other side. And they made the point that the previous government had been going to release some prisoners. Yep. So I don't know the number that the previous government were going to release. I don't know if they would have handled it better. But the first thing which struck me was this is another clunkingly bad bit of PR by the new government. And this is the third thing which has just made us all cringe and say, I can't believe this, it's getting dystopian. Because first we had about the pensioners not getting their winter fuel allowance. Then we had David Lammy announcing that he was going to withhold some arms licenses to Israel, yep. Which is bad enough. On the I think it was the same day, or the same day as the hostages' murders were being shown around the world. And then we have this. Oh, we're going to let prisoners out now. So I just wonder who is doing their PR, because they should be OK, they've been in opposition for years, but they should be astute political operators. Now, Keir Starmer apparently says we're going to have to be unpopular, but he's also talking about, and he said on the steps of Downing Street, about Britain needs a greater reset. Well, what are we being reset into?
That's the big question, and it's not boding well, is it? Alistair, when it comes to this government announcement of releasing 1,700 prisoners, followed by 5,000 more, to tackle the issue of overcrowding in our prisons, what impact do you think this will actually have on the actual victims of crime, knowing their perpetrators are actually in prison and they can feel safe? But some of the victims haven't even been informed regarding the kind of this big announcement that so many prisoners are going to be released, which is frightening for them.
It seems unbelievable, like Melanie has just said, that they wouldn't have prepared themselves, because I've read the same reports as you, that many of those victims, and some of them are afraid because of this early release, haven't been informed that they were going to release these people. Obviously, we knew, because as Melanie said earlier, that even the previous government had talked about overcrowded prisons. We've been bombarded with that for the last 5 years, possibly longer. And a program needs to be put together to increase the prisons rather than release the prisoners, because obviously, if it was petty crime, but unfortunately petty criminals are not even picked up these days because it's not regarded as important. But these are true criminals who have been involved in violence, sexual abuse, and they are saying that those who are a danger to, or predators or whatever, would not be released. But these are being released having spent 40% of their time in doing their sentence. I mean, I don't know if anyone else saw the news reports on BBC as well, where outside, I think it was Wandsworth prison, there were people with champagne corks, you know, because these people were being released early. And I'm thinking, for the victims, it's terrible. For people on the streets who at the moment are not getting police protection for crimes on their homes, crimes on their person, it's going to be a very frightening time for those, particularly those people who have been on the other side. They are the ones who've received the problems in the past. So the government really needs to have a reschedule of the way they're thinking. You know, they seem to be panically moving into things. I can imagine part of it is because of all the riots we had in the streets, and then they want to come across as a tough government or tough party, imprisoning those people who are causing the fires and the riots and so on. And of course we need that, but the answer is not to release prisoners. The answer is to make sure that you have another way of imprisoning those who are criminals.
No, absolutely. And Melanie, how must the victims feel knowing that they've facing so much trauma now? Many of them would have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and knowing that their perpetrators are being released and have only served 40% of their prison time. How is that justice? And that's what many of the victims will actually be feeling, that that those who've committed crimes against them, and many of them for violent conduct and behaviour, could then soon be released on the streets to do it again.
It must be absolutely terrifying, and I'm just thinking, in the same way as police have, or the state has a witness protection program, there should be some kind of protection for the victims, even funding for them to move home, because especially if someone was stalking them and knows where they live. And I just think it adds up to this picture of us not feeling safe or secure anymore. I mean, obviously if you're a female, certainly, I'm thinking twice about going out at night now. I mean, by God's grace, I live in a fairly safe area, but you just don't know. And then from the point of view of anyone, I mean, a shopkeeper who's been attacked, and you know, lots of people in shops are, you know, people are shoplifting. Shopkeepers don't feel safe anymore. All sorts of shop staff don't. All sorts of people don't. And it's just a whole picture. I don't feel safe in person, and I don't feel safe online either, because of the recent sentences being handed down to people, arrests being made for people who've said something online.
Yeah, no, well, that's the direction the government and the police seem to be more interested in kind of virtual crime than real crime. And Alistair, yeah, considering that the vast majority of those who go to prison sadly end up becoming repeat offenders and then reoffend, surely this just going to create an even bigger problem, isn't it, in society and in our nation, and does not do anything to keep our safe streets, because proper procedures are not in place to actually deal with so many prisoners being released onto our streets. Share with us your thoughts.
Well, I worked, I think I worked in prison visits as a pastor. I'd go and do Sunday services down in Kent regularly, and you'd have some great conversations with the people who were in the prison. And unfortunately, most of them, the reoffending rate is very high because there isn't anything set up to watch over them or provide for them once they come out. They're kind of left to their own devices. And very often they reoffend simply because they have nowhere to live. They don't want to end up in the streets. They want to come back into, they almost become prison mentality. They almost have a prison mentality. They almost feel more secure in that situation. Apart from the ones who are really professional criminals, if I can put it that way, they want to get out and be back on the streets and be effective in their crime. So it's a big challenge. It's not only that we need a better prison service or more prisons built, we do need to put into practice some way of providing, keeping a watch on. I know that several of the people I ministered to, when they came out, they would not be tagged, if that's right. It's not, I don't mean tagged as in literally, but they knew how to escape the system. And the ones who would reoffend were the ones who really did want to get back into the prison situation because they felt secure in it. So this is a very challenging time for the prison services and those in charge to show yourself tough, but tough in the right way. You have to think think out of the box. If you are releasing people after 40% of their sentences, or maybe even less in some cases, you're releasing people who are potentially a risk to, particularly those who have been offended against. It's frightening to think. I mean, Melanie just said we should be thinking about maybe providing for the ones who have been offended against somewhere safe to move to. Why? Why should we be asking them to move from the homes where they live, their families are, and all the rest for their own safety? We should be providing them with safety and keep making sure that the offenders are kept away from those that have been offended against. So it's a difficult situation, but the government needs to come to grips with it and put things in place which is going to solve the problems.
Yeah, and Melanie, the Prison Officers Association is warning that many of the prisoners we'll release will end up being homeless on the streets because there isn't the proper housing that is being provided for them. And that will then, as Alistair rightly said, will only kind of lead to more offences being committed and more, and them going back into prison. So effectively, you probably emptied the prisons for now. But then again, you'll quickly refill them again. But this time the problem will be much, much, much bigger. But share with us how this problem goes beyond the power of the state. And this is nothing that Keir Starmer can actually solve or do, because it's an issue of the heart. It's an issue of godliness in our nation, a lack of morality, a lack of respect for our fellow neighbours. And of course, this really comes because we have legislated Jesus out of our parliament, out of our public square, out of our schools, out of our hospitals, out of our public life. So is it no wonder that there's no sense of morality and we are slipping down that very slippery slope of lawlessness?
Yes. Well, I was just thinking while Alice was talking, in the current paper we got this testimony of this woman who has an amazing new life because she found Jesus, but she was in and out of prison for years. She had drug problems, a lot of relationships, children outside marriage, and there is, I think at the root of it all, it is God, and now she's found the Lord. She is completely satisfied and doesn't need other relationships. But it also goes back, I think, to a lot of fatherlessness in society.
Oh yeah, that's
so lots of men and women suffer for lack of a father. There are also high statistics of the children who've been in care ending up in prison. This is what I think is so awful. I believe the current system sort of abandons them at age 16, or there's some kind of scheme where they can have supported living up to 18. But it must be the sort of the rootlessness, the temporary nature of it. And also going back to what Alistair said about those who become institutionalized, there was someone who became a Christian, who'd been a drug addict and a drug dealer, and we had his testimony in the paper. He said he quite liked prison because he got his laundry done. So he must have been in quite a nice prison. No, we're now like to have more people who are homeless on the streets. That's has its own culture. You can't get a job if you're homeless. You can't get benefits, or what? It's all a sort of a vicious circle, and it's always becoming sort of Dickensian. Sort of a whole Victorian underclass that we're going to end up with. It's there, but I think if you've got more released prisoners who are homeless, it's going to be more obvious.
And Alistair, what kind of message is the government sending out to criminals, telling them that effectively they only have to, if they are convicted, which sadly in this day and age is even a more difficult challenge, that if they are convicted they could only possibly face 40% of their prison sentence. So clearly this is like a green light for criminals to go and commit crime, knowing that if they do get into prison they'll only serve 40% of their prison sentence, or they'll say that the prisons are overfull and overcrowded. We can't accept you, and so it does tell the criminal that really by committing crime you won't have to pay a price.
Exactly. It's a difficult, really difficult message being put out to them. And as Melanie just mentioned about lawlessness, that's warned about in Matthew 24, that lawlessness will abound and the hearts of many will grow cold as a result. And that, we tend to think about that as being Christian message for the Christians growing cold. But of course, even these people who have been offended against, they are cold in fear about what's going to happen. And the message being put out by our government at this time is they're soft. And if it's 40% this year, what's it going to be next year? Maybe it'll be 30%. As they increase our taxes, they'll decrease the prison sentences, because obviously, unless they can solve the overcrowding problem, they don't want anyone else going into prison. And I know, Melanie, that a lot of the prisoners will reoffend. They have a history of it. The statistics tell us that. And therefore, what are you going to say? You reoffend and you ignore them and just leave them out and they reoffend again and again. You have to take the right actions against the criminals. They are doing things which are against the law, and if they feel that by breaking the law, I refer again to the program, or the news program I watched, where they were champagne corks going off, and they were doing the old like the Grand Prix winners, splashing it all over the people, because they're thinking this is great, we can go and do this and that, and we'll spend maybe 6 weeks instead of a year in prison. So it's a wrong message being portrayed to the criminals, and certainly a worrying message to the ones who are offended against. And I know there are people who were offended against. It's a lifetime after that trying to get over an offence, a physical offence against one, whether it's a man beating up another man, or a woman being attacked by a partner or an ex-partner. It takes forever to get over those things, and giving a soft message like this is not helping either side of the scale. The criminals are thinking, yes, this is great news for us, but the offenders and the police force, they're thinking, well, what's the point? We can take them in, put them in a cell for the night, and get them to go before a court, and the court's going to say, well, we better release you because there's no way we can send you to. So an overhaul is necessary, and I sometimes think that this shouldn't be a political thing. It should be the various parties working together for the good of the nation. But politically, that rarely happens. They really care what's the best thing for the nation or the people. They're more concerned about winning the next election and winning more friends. And that's, the electorate is what they're aiming at. But this is not, I don't think this is bringing any joy to anyone in our nation other than the criminal-minded people.
No, absolutely, and of course justice is so important for the righteousness of a nation, and many victims of crime, particularly those murder, which is a hideous crime, they have a prison sentence their entire life, knowing that their loved one was brutally murdered. So again, this is not weighted in favour or any consideration taken on behalf of the victim. And the one thing with prisons, yes, they might be overcrowded, but if people are in prison, then they can't commit crimes outside of prison. So you do keep our streets safe. Melanie, Alison Pearson, who's an excellent columnist who writes in the Daily Telegraph, had an interesting article today as of the recording of this programme, under the headline, "Starmer's Britain is not a safe place for women." And she writes that early release of domestic abuse prisoners, combined with a flood of illegal migrants from misogynist cultures, puts females in danger. Share with us how, for example, this government is treating women, and with the release of all these prisoners means that women find it very unsafe now in our country, and particularly under this new Labour government.
Yes, it is very, very concerning, because victims of domestic abuse will be feeling alarmed and very vulnerable, and they won't know what to do and how to proceed. And as we said earlier, there won't be necessarily any protection measures put in place. It's very interesting, because if you go to a lot of motorway service stations, there's a sign up saying, if you feel threatened, go to anyone and ask for Angela. And so we're just acknowledging that women are vulnerable at the moment, and always have been. But I think we've had a relative freedom and safety for some years. But now, of course, we've got one of the threats which we're talking about is the not just domestic abuse prisoners, but illegal migrants being freed, and they are from misogynist cultures. We've seen this in other parts of Europe, particularly, say, Sweden and Germany, where the local girls have been attacked by these immigrants from, as you say, misogynist cultures, who think that these women are fair game because they're not going around covered in black from head to foot. So there's a very real concern, and the government is not, in everything else it's trying to do, thinking about women and their safety, although there are so many women in the cabinet.
Yeah, and this is what's so surprising, isn't it, Alistair, that we've got this Labour government that's supposed to be championing the cause of women's rights, and here we go. We again let women down, or this government certainly let women down, particularly by allowing so many of these prisoners who have carried out the most horrific abuse against women to be back on the streets to recommit abuse again. So for a woman who's been attacked by a man in the most horrific way, felt relieved that there's been a prison sentence, he's in prison, so there she feels safe, and then to know that they're back on the streets again, but not even being informed they're back on the streets again, must present some awful worrying nights for them. So surely this government needs to be aware of this and tackle this issue urgently.
Absolutely right. I mean, the domestic abuse situation is a huge problem anyway. It seems to be an increasing problem. And when a sentence is passed and the person who's been offended against, a woman usually we're talking about in this situation, she kind of knows in her mind, okay, I'm sort of free for the next X amount of years. And then suddenly, without any, they're almost hearing from the press rather than from the government. They'll listen to something on the radio or something on social media or the news on the television, and they suddenly think, where I was thinking I'm safe for another 5 years, next week they're going to be released, or the week after, or later this year. And who do they go to for help? There should be, like Melanie has said, there should be somebody within the government circles who are making the rules able to help these people. And the police force, we know the police force are stretched. I mean, if you've had any kind of criminal activity in your home or against your car or anything, you phone your police force and they'll say, this is the insurance number you can claim. They're not coming even to see you to check that if you're traumatized or not. That just doesn't seem to, people don't seem to be important in the way things are running at the moment. And that's probably due to not enough police on the streets. I don't know what the problem is. The government knows more than I do, but it needs to be fixed. and for younger women or older women who've been in any way abused, there has been these murders of women by police in the past years, doesn't it? So what sort of confidence does that give a woman in the police force when it's one of their own who's doing the offence? And certainly for people living on their own, they may be cut off from their families. They need to be looked after. They need to be provided for. And a government that just disregards that, and maybe lack of communication, you can make excuses. But when people have been offended, you don't want to make excuses. You want to put things right.
Absolutely. Melanie, aren't we seeing the government's creating a bit of a climate of fear here? Knowing the release of over 6,000, nearly 7,000 prisoners in the next few weeks will have a profound impact on how people feel safe in the streets. Pensioners no longer feel safe as well, considering they might feel that their pensions are being raided, plus also knowing that they won't get any kind of government allowance to help with their heating, particularly during the cold winter. The Jewish community feels threatened by the government's approach to Israel. So there's certainly a climate of fear over this nation. But share with us how this is essentially because our government has legislated Jesus out of our parliament, out of our public square, abandoned completely our Judeo-Christian heritage, done everything it could to break up the family. And this is really a result of a broken society that comes from broken families and broken marriages.
Yes, completely. It's just been building up for years and years. It's almost surprising that it's not worse. And the Lord has been very patient. But there is a general consensus that with the current government, it is a chastising of the nation and judgment. And we have to, as Christians at this time, be quite bold about sharing our faith, about sharing the love of Jesus, about sharing that he is the answer and the healer. And I think we almost have to do this while we have a window before the government finds some excuse to clamp down on us. Lots of church leaders are talking about preparing for persecution. And so, funnily enough, when we were at Southwest Bible Week, David Noakes was talking about some of you will be shedding your blood as Christians. I wish he hadn't looked in my direction.
Anyway, we've got to leave the programme there. So Melanie and Alistair, thank you so much for being guests on Politics Today. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. It definitely feels like our nation and our society are living in a state of lawlessness, and the government is really not helping by soon releasing nearly 7,000 prisoners back on our streets. But we don't need to fear, we just need to pray more for our government and pray that we would be protected. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.